All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to be waiting another 20 seconds to allow people to log in, but thank you for joining us. For those that are just joining us, we're going to be waiting another 10 to 15 seconds to allow others the opportunity to join us. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our friends, our colleagues, and our associates and clients around the world. Welcome to what I believe is the sixth edition of Interfor Academy's webinar series. This one is very exciting on a personal and professional level. It's a little bit of a departure from our normal topics, but I feel that it's an exciting topic to cover. And with all the UAPs and UFOs and drones being discussed in media the past couple of months, I think there's no better time than now. And on that front, we are lucky to have one of the world's leading experts with us. So I'd like to welcome Ralph, who's joining us here from New York City. And as always, the head of Interfor Academy, and not just the head of Interfor Academy, but one of our leading instructors, Jeremy Hurewitz as well. So with that, again, thank you everyone for joining. I'll pop in at the end. And if there are any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and we'll be sure to get to them if we can. Again, thank you very much. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Don. This is a really exciting edition of the Interfor Academy webinar series. I am personally very excited to welcome Ralph Blumenthal, who I have a great deal of respect and admiration for, both with a long history in journalism and then his more recent work, which we're going to be focused on today. But let me just briefly introduce Ralph, who started working for the New York Times back, I believe, in 1964. And he reported from a wide variety of locations, including Germany, Vietnam, Cambodia, and quite a few locations around the US. But we're today more interested in his more recent work. And it's kind of out of this world, if you will. And that will be the last joke I make in that respect here. And I'm sure everybody will be quite glad with that. Ralph is the author of Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack. He is also the author of UFOs, Mysteries in the Sky, which maybe Ralph could talk briefly a little bit about, because I don't know that much about it, but I believe it helps younger people understand the phenomenon of UFOs. He's been featured on a wide variety of television programs. I have the regular experience of turning on the TV and watching a show like Ancient Aliens, which I enjoy, and seeing Ralph on there. And I go, there's Ralph, who I know a little bit personally. He's also been featured on the series that is shown on Netflix called Encounters, which I really recommend as well. Ralph, hello. It's great to be with you today.
Jeremy, thank you for having me. A real pleasure.
Great, great. I have a question teed up for you, but why don't you just briefly tell us about that UFOs book real quick, because I don't know anything about it, and then we'll jump into it.
Well, thank you. My wife and I did this book. She's a children's book writer, and she saw me, working away at all the UFO stories for the New York Times and my book, The Believer. And she came up with the idea, why don't we do a children's book, a picture book, to introduce, young people to this phenomenon. And the idea is that it's a strictly nonfiction book. It's what we know and basically what we don't know, which is mostly everything about the phenomenon. It's called UFOs, OHS, Mysteries in the Sky. And it's just a way of telling young people about an issue that's going to, attract them the rest of their lives. And they're the ones who are going to probably be finding out a lot more about it. That we don't know really what they are, where they come from, why they're here, who's running them, and all the important things we don't know. But we know that thanks to the government now, we know they exist and they're real. And they've been visiting us for a very long time. They being, who knows? Anyway, that's the book. And it's a wonderful gift, we think, for young people to introduce them and to their parents, who don't really know often how to broach the subject if a kid says he's interested in it, and librarians and teachers. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to mention the book.
Yeah, my pleasure. It'll lead very nicely into one of the questions I have for you later on, which we've advertised about, how do you prepare for the unpreparable? It seems kind of like in line with that as well. But Ralph, let's kind of start at the beginning here about how you came to work in this field. I know it started in 2017, and you're such a good storyteller. Can you share with our audience today how you came to write this rather, shocking headline piece in the New York Times with a collaborator of yours? We would love to hear that story.
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, actually, it started long before 2017 because I was working on a book about John Mack, who you mentioned, the Harvard psychiatrist who really got into the subject of alien encounters from stories from his patients. But we'll go back to that story. So I'd been working on this book for a while when in 2017, a colleague of mine, Leslie Kane, who's one of the world's probably the preeminent expert on UFOs, um, came to me and with a kind of a shocking story. She said she'd been in Washington, D.C., and attended a meeting with the then secret head of a Pentagon UFO office, sometimes called UAPs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. We still call them UFOs. She'd gone to this meeting, and the head of the Pentagon office said he was quitting, and that he had been running a secret Pentagon operation to track these UFOs for a number of years, and the Pentagon never got out of the UFO business, unlike what it maintained. Um, in 1970, with Project Blue Book, supposedly the government was out of the UFO business because there was nothing to see. Anyway, that wasn't true. So she found out about that. She told me about it. And I reached out to my contacts at the New York Times. I had left in 2009, but I still wrote stories for them. And very quickly, they bought into the idea that this was an interesting story. I mean, a secret Pentagon unit to investigate UFOs. The head was quitting because he was getting a lot of internal opposition. So that's the story Leslie and I collaborated on with the Pentagon correspondent Helene Cooper, because she had the contacts at the Pentagon that we wanted.
Right.
And we broke that story in the New York Times on the front page on a Sunday, December 17th. And like many stories on the front page of the New York Times, it was a bombshell. So that's the short version.
That is such a fascinating story. As someone who spent a lot of his career in journalism, I remember when that came out and the impact that had. And because I'm somebody who's tracked this kind of phenomenon for a little while myself, or quite a while, I remember how seismic the story was. And, I give you and your collaborators just a huge amount of credit because it really changed the nature of how the media approaches this too. There's been a proliferation of TV shows and people exploring this, and the number of serious people that have come out now and started talking about this has just grown exponentially. So, you should be really proud after a career in journalism to have done something that really, helped change the nature of society in a big way. Can you talk a little bit about how that impacted, this story and the stories that followed? Because I know you wrote a series of other really fascinating stories, including that the U.S. has potentially acquired technology or downed aircrafts that they might even reverse engineer. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, of course, we didn't know the impact it would have when we wrote the story. Like all journalists, you start off,
Sure.
embarking on something, and you don't know how it's going to be received. It did really make a big impact because we keep hearing it made the world basically safe for serious UFO reporting, and mainstream media weren't afraid to touch it anymore after that. It still is kind of a stigmatized subject, but not the way it was. So what made our story especially good, by the way, was that we had access to two and later three Pentagon videos of encounters with these UFOs. And nobody could claim after that they weren't real, or that these were fabricated, or somebody was, misinterpreting aircraft lights, reflections off the desert floor, all these different explanations over the years that really don't hold water. Water, by the way, being another aspect of
Right.
UFOs as they go in and out of the water, but we can get to that. Anyway, so the story did really make a big impact. And we were told later it was one of the most accessed web stories of the New York Times had ever run. So we went on from that to a story about some of the pilots, the U.S. pilots who had encountered these objects and seen them with their own eyes, and were able to describe them in some cases as tic tacs, like giant tic tac candies with no wings or means of propulsion, no rivets, just like white propane tanks that were capable of the most extraordinary maneuvers, breathtaking speed, able to disappear and appear. So we talked to some of those pilots on the record with their name. All this was, we always, used people with their real names. And then and there were some close encounters, by the way, between these UFOs or UAP and jet pilots, where they were really afraid for their lives. They thought they'd have a collision, and they reported that, and we had those reports. And then in probably the most difficult story we were able to produce, and far from satisfactory, I'll be the first to admit, because it left a lot of holes, a story that said the U.S. Probably did recover intact pieces and even a whole UFO, and was working with private contractors, hiding that information to reverse engineer them, to learn what made them go and how they operated. This remains, whatever you want to call it, the goal of all UFO reporting is to zero in on this aspect. Do we U.S. have UFOs? Are we reverse engineering them? And there's new information coming out about that. But that's where we took the story at the time. And I should tell you, Jeremy, also that this area is heavily classified. This information is not readily available. The government doesn't talk about it. The people who know what it's all about are not free to talk about it. The people who are talking about it and often giving out misinformation or disinformation don't know. They're not cleared for this information. So they can say with a clear conscience, oh, I'm not aware of any, evidence that the Pentagon is pursuing, whatever. So it's a very, very difficult area to report in. And that's what we're facing.
Right. Well, I have some builds on that, but I just hearing you describe this, it's really amazing. And I think one of the most extraordinary things that came out of that period of your reporting with the video footage from the pilots, because these are incredibly well-trained individuals, and it's the visuals, but for me, it's their verbal chatter. Oh my God, look at that thing! Can you believe that? I mean,
Yeah.
This is extraordinary stuff. So to me, all of that reporting combined with, the incredibly credible pilots, talking about these things just gives a ton of credence to UAPs. So let's talk a little, you were getting into where I want to go with my next question. I know I've chatted with you a little bit about this. I was at the Pentagon a few weeks ago, and I met with some rather senior officials and spoke off the record with them. And they expressed an interest actually in UAPs, but basically told me that, even though they were quite senior, weren't aware of any program in which this was being studied at the Pentagon. Kind of threw water on the idea that the U.S. had recovered anything, and jokingly sort of said if we're trying to reverse engineer it, we're really bad at it, and because nothing's happened, and didn't really think that there's anything being studied at the Pentagon, and certainly didn't think that there, and I want to get into this after, as any plans to sort of, prepare society for anything, even though, these things are kind of occurring more and more. Why don't you tell me what you think about where we are with the government today, what I just shared with you, where things stand currently?
Okay, so the government has come quite a ways. I'll certainly say that from the days when, in the early years of the UFO UAP uproar, which really goes back to the 50s, when the government basically threw cold water on the whole thing, to now, where they say in various reports that are official government reports, saying that this is a real phenomenon. There are objects up there that cannot be identified, but they're real. They're physically real, and we don't know where they come from. We don't know what they're doing here. We don't know how they work. but they're real. Now that's a real big step forward, as I said, from the 50s when the government said these are delusions, people are mentally ill who report that. They put out orders that nobody in the military services was to report these things, and if you did report it, including the private airline companies, you would be referred to a psychiatrist. So it really put a damper on this whole thing. But now the government is encouraging members of the service to come forward with their accounts. So that is a big step forward. That said, the people who are interacting with members of the public and the media are not the people involved in this most secretive work. It is definitely stovepiped, which is a word meaning that the work is incredibly narrowly focused on a few people, certainly certain programs. It's not widely dispersed. It's not publicly discussed. And we know from Pentagon spokespeople who we've talked to, who always say what they told you, that we're not aware of any of it. But these people are not aware of that. That is not, that's part of the trick, how this whole thing works. The people who are aware of it aren't talking to us, to the press, to the public. So the Pentagon can say with a straight face, the spokespeople, we're not aware of any work like this going on. But we know now from people like David Grush, who came forward last year, or about that time, a little more, and testified before Congress, that there definitely are programs to recover UFOs, UAP, that they are being held very tightly controlled in certain places, often with the help of private defense contractors who are not really amenable to the Freedom of Information laws. So they don't have to respond the way government agencies have to respond, even though they don't respond themselves at all. But we know from people, insiders, who have had access to this information and who are not anonymous people, but people who've come out with their military records, people like Lou Elizondo, who was the guy I mentioned, who headed the UAP program in the Pentagon and who resigned, who have said again and again that these programs exist, that the government is aware of them, participating in them, working with private contractors to reverse engineer these strange objects. So I'm not surprised, Jeremy, that you heard what you heard at the Pentagon. But again, not to be taken at face value.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And Lou Elizondo is still very active out there talking about this, right?
Absolutely.
What I think one of the things that the Pentagon would want to pay a lot of attention to with all of this is whether other countries are successful in recovering downed aircraft. And do you have any sense of the government being deeply concerned that other countries are ahead of us in this, or that anything that they're seeing could credibly be considered technology that's been augmented by some alien technology?
Absolutely, they're concerned. David Grush, in his testimony to Congress, and by the way, he not only talked to us, but he's talked to Congress and testified in open session, and then presumably in private session, because there are a lot of things he couldn't. Huh?
Is that the
David
pilot?
Grush was an intelligence guy,
Right.
who testified to. He was really the biggest, most important figure to come forward in the last year or so with information about these secret UAP recovery programs. Again, he came out under his own name. We checked him out. He's a bona fide intelligence expert with a long, public record of service. And he has said these things, publicly, and testified to Congress. And Congress has taken information in closed session, as we know. We're learning many other things. So, there is a lot of information available,
Right.
but we don't know the full extent of it because, again, we don't have the security clearances.
And why do you think this has changed? Is it a combination of intrepid reporting and kind of whistleblowers? Is it something that has just become undeniable to the government? They can't just sort of, ridicule people anymore? Or is it maybe all of these things a way to kind of let off a little bit of steam to say, yeah, this is real, and then they can, feel like they've at least, been credible and let people talk about this a little bit without revealing too much. But what do you think's behind these kind of
I
rough?
think it's the first thing more that it was out of their control, that the genie was sort of out of the bottle. Thanks to people like John Mack, who I wrote about, the Harvard psychiatrist, who put all these things, at least raised the questions publicly about
Mhm.
the accounts people were giving him that he could not debunk. Um, and I think and Congress has become much more aggressive, by the way.
Right.
Congress has held, a series of hearings. There are members of Congress who are pushing for more information, demanding information, because it is a crime, really, to withhold information from Congress when it has to do with spending taxpayers' dollars. These programs are all fully funded, by the taxpayer, and yet they've been kept secret to the point where even Congress, which has mechanisms for, informing members of Congress outside the public domain. In other words, let them know what's going on without revealing it publicly. Even that has not been adhered to. So Congress has been really pushing now for more information, demanding information. And, one of the things Grush said, to get back to your earlier question about this competition between the governments, countries, he said, and we reported this in the New York Times, that the U.S. is engaged in a modern day arms race with earthly adversaries like Russia, like China, to commandeer this information, to access this information about these, UFOs. What are they? How do they work? And to reverse engineer the physics of it, because it represents a tremendous windfall. I don't have to explain to you what this would mean for any country to gather this technology. My God, it would change the world, not only
Yeah.
energy wise, but in terms of military, preparedness, military aggressiveness, new kinds of weapons, planes that can appear and disappear, fly at hypersonic speeds, operate in the water. I mean, this would change the world. So the countries are engaged. We know that. We know that they are engaged in a worldwide arms race for this technology. These craft retrievals have not only been in the United States. David Grush told a story to Congress that apparently Mussolini got control of one of these crashed UFOs, and it was transferred at some point to the U.S., maybe after the war. I forgot the details, but that's been on the public record. And Russia has been very, very much involved and engaged in this. So it's not just the United States.
Well, we're starting to get a couple questions that are kind of in line with that, and it's a good moment for me to pause and urge everybody to drop a question in the Q&A area, and we'll get to those in just a bit. I just have a few more for Ralph as well, and I'm going someplace with this, but I think it really sets up where I kind of want to end up our discussion before Q&A. But let's talk about a more recent event, and Ralph, I'm very much not looking for you to tell us what happened or anything, but I like your opinion. We all saw the kind of drone hysteria over New Jersey recently, and I think it really speaks to where we are as a society right now. There is the proliferation of drones. There's just more and more of them. But because of the work of you and others and whistleblowers and the proliferation of this in the media, I think people are looking to the skies more and they're less afraid to sort of say, hey, this doesn't look right. What are your thoughts on what we saw in New Jersey? What's your kind of takeaway on the phenomenon? Because nothing's been, said definitively about what happened there.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest mysteries around. And even, Jeremy, even to call them drones is to kind of, obfuscate, or, not deliberately, but it complicates the question, because we understand drones to be human manufactured objects. They're very understandable. They're used in wars, they're used militarily, they're used in photography, surveillance. Everybody knows what a drone is. So to call these things drones right away suggests that they're man-made products that are flying around New Jersey and all over the country, other places, and they're explainable. They're earthly technology, whereas we really don't know that they're earthly technology. Some of them are airplane lights, things that are eminently explainable. a large proportion of UFOs and UAP in history have been explainable as natural phenomena. But a certain number of them, including the most spectacular cases, are definitely not. So even to call these things drones to begin with kind of puts a thumb on the scale that, oh, these are just, man-made objects that haven't been identified yet. They're not, most of them. No one knows what they are. And, you raised a good question when you asked me, what I thought, because I had the same question about these things when the controversy first broke, a couple of months ago. These things flying around, and everyone was seeing them and reporting them. They weren't moving like regular drones. They were moving sometimes very, very fast, disappearing, and then reappearing, and they could not be explained. So I'm as much in the dark as anybody on it. There is no secret explanation that I'm aware of that would explain these things.
Right.
So we're left. It is really one of the modern mysteries.
Yep, absolutely. And that kind of brings me to what I wanted to get involved with you about here, which is kind of preparations, if there could be any, for contact for this kind of thing, because this is what kind of spurred me to really start thinking about this and talk to you about it. Because, obviously, Interfor International, we're a corporate security and intelligence firm here. We don't typically traffic in details about UAPs. But what came to mind as I watched the New Jersey drone situation unfold is that we as a society are terribly unprepared for anything like this. And in the industry of corporate security, one of the things we do with clients is known as business continuity planning. So we help clients to deal with low likelihood, high impact events. Sometimes that's a natural disaster like a hurricane or an earthquake, could be a terrorist attack. To me, this is the most low likelihood, high impact event you can imagine. And while a business might, work might feel ridiculous if you have an enormous craft, say, hovering over Washington, D.C., I personally think it's prudent for businesses to think about this a little bit. And I know I've spoken with chief security officers, several of whom manage aircraft, that have said, I get questions about this now because of the reasons we've discussed
Right.
before, and they don't have answers. And what came to mind with New Jersey is that, the government communicated poorly. There were senior
That's for sure.
New Jersey, right, enforcement and others who are saying we need answers here, and the government is not communicating well. So, if there was a situation where there was a craft and communications were down, how shouldn't local municipalities be able, maybe driving around with a bullhorn and telling people to stay in their homes and be calm? Other protocols should be put in place. I wrote this piece with your cooperation, Ralph, which I'll put in the chat in the Hill about this matter. And, kind of jokingly said, America has such a well-armed populace. You don't want people walking outside and firing at
Right.
a craft lest they kick off an intergalactic war, right? I mean, it's kind
Right.
of funny, but, it seems like with the proliferation of evidence, with the government saying, we don't know what these things are, it seems somewhat prudent that both businesses with large amounts of employees and certainly governments should be involved in making some basic preparations to deal with these scenarios. And I wonder what you think of that thought.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, the first thing I would say is I don't think anyone should go around taking matters into their own hands and deciding they're going to shoot one of these things down. Private pilots, people on the ground with high, velocity weapons, etc. First of all, it doesn't work from what we've, known in previous stories of people trying to fire at these things. It doesn't, for various reasons, it doesn't work. These things are protected, or they are operating in some kind of sphere that makes them immune to, fire from even, high intensity weapons. So that's the first thing not to do, I would suggest. The other question is how we prepare for contact, which may be the next step. I mean, it's reasonable, or at least possible, that at some point there's going to be some forward movement in the contacts with these unidentified objects, whatever they are. And you know, the famous story of Orson Welles and the Mars attack in 1938 that caused the panic, not quite the panic that's been portrayed, that's been exaggerated, but you know, people were panicking at the thought of you know, a alien enemy landing and you know, causing chaos. Um, so it is prudent to start to think about what the effect would be. Nobody really knows. I mean, there's some people who say, well, the world public is already prepared for this, far ahead of the governments. They know that we're not alone,
Yeah.
that the chances are, you know, just mathematically that there's other advanced civilizations in the cosmos. So it wouldn't be a big shock to find that out. So maybe people are ahead of the government in terms of, you know, their worry, you know, the government's worry of, oh, how would the public react to this kind of disclosure? So the answer is, I mean, nobody knows what the reaction should be and what, but I think it certainly is prudent for companies to invest some philosophical time thinking about the implications of this, what it would mean for theology, what it would mean for technology, you know, mass psychology. But certainly no one should take this into their own hands and figure out, you know, a solution on their own. I think there are organizations like MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and NUFORC, you know, there's all these civilian UFO reporting organizations that collect information. So the first thing is if a private company has encounters to report, they should report it to some authority, either the Pentagon or to more likely one of these civilian agencies that seems to be much freer to take this information and keep a record of it. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I want to get to some of the questions that are coming in here, but I think when we talk about business continuity and when we talk about planning, I think we'd have to just quickly shine a light on the aviation industry. I alluded to this with, you know, companies that do have private planes, and you were talking about this earlier, you know, the way people were ridiculed in the past for reporting. Now, are you aware in aviation that things have changed a little bit and they're reporting this and, you know,
Yeah, I am. I mean, I know that the Air Force in particular has now said, the Pentagon has said they want members of the service to report encounters, which is a real turnaround from, you know, the previous thing where they would stigmatize you for reporting it. I'm not so aware of private airline companies now, whether they have changed their reporting, but it's become much more possible for pilots to report encounters. First of all, for safety, because it's still unknown what the implications of a collision might be. I mean, if these things got too close, you know, we don't know. There have been stories of close encounter, and as I said, the aviation record is full of accounts of near misses, but we don't know yet what, you know, how dangerous these you know, near misses or so, these actual collisions could be. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think there are ways companies can prepare for this, and certainly companies should have a policy of allowing their employees to report these things because the more information, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that that might be a good story for you to think about it for the next one, the aviation industry and how they're responding to this. I know I would like to read that, Ralph.
It is a good story.
Before we get to some of the questions here, I think that conversations like this can be valuable as politicians are showing more interest in this and putting pressure on levers of the government. And we should be putting pressure on our elected officials to help municipalities, cities prepare for something like what we saw in New Jersey. So there isn't hysteria. So there isn't an information blackout, a communication breakdown, and we can be safe and, you know, try to deal with something that, as you noted, theologically, philosophically, spiritually will potentially change our entire world. Let me build on that with one of the questions from the audience is about more of the current administration. Do you have any sense of whether the current administration will be more transparent with the American people about UAPs? I think that we've heard the current president say that he has some interest in it. I know Hillary Clinton in the past has said that. What are your views on where we are now?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, John Ratliff, who's now the new, you know, security czar, He has said some things in the past that were very encouraging for openness. And President Trump certainly has shown that he's not limited by conventional understandings of how presidents act. So I think he's open to dispensing more information. Presidents, by the way, have not been universally briefed on this phenomenon. A few presidents, we understand, knew something about it and have been briefed. I think the first President Bush, George H.W., with his background in the CIA, he did know a good bit about this phenomenon. But not every president is taken aside, early on and said, "Sir, we have to tell you about the situation with UFOs." It doesn't work that way. Presidents are, not considered having a need to know unless it impacts on some particular issue. So that's something interesting we learned in our reporting, that it's not a given that every president is briefed on the most secret, UFO information. And President Trump may or may not be at this point. But I think he certainly has the maverick, approach to things. We've seen that. And he may well decide to give out more information than other presidents have done. So that's about all I can say about that. We just don't know.
Yeah. Well, he's not exactly known for his discretion, is he? He could be briefed and then, tweet something or put it
That's
on.
right. He might let something out that is
So
not
these,
supposed to be out.
right.
Again, as I said, this information is very, very highly restricted within the national security establishment, the intelligence world. It's very closely held, and the people who know about it don't talk about it, at least not usually. And the people who do talk about it don't know. So that's where we are now. If Trump insists on getting briefed and he wants to know, all the secrets, perhaps he'll talk about it more than other presidents have.
Yeah. Well, this is an area where maybe we should root for the deep state so he doesn't something that reveals too much. There's a question from the audience about kind of journalistic tradecraft. Like, can you talk a little bit more about how you've navigated? We could call it the deep state. People who don't want to talk about this. What's that been like? How do you develop sources with people who want to do everything they can to avoid you?
Yeah, very difficult. I can tell you that Leslie Kane and I, who really continued our reporting, and we wrote a piece, we really broke the David Grush story in the Debrief, which is a very good website on intelligence and security matters, because the Times and the Washington Post weren't ready to sign off on that story yet. We approached them, but for various reasons, it got too difficult, and we needed to move quickly. David Grush was being threatened, so he needed to be protected by coming out. So we wrote that story in the Debrief. But it's very difficult. We know of other whistleblowers. We're not the only ones who know. I mean, there are other reporters who know, but that we're aware of other whistleblowers out there with presumably very important information who have not made the decision yet to come forward. It's very hard. We don't print, I mean, Leslie and I don't print stories based on anonymous sources because I don't think they have the kind of credibility you need in this dangerous field. So whereas on the web you can read all kinds of stuff attributed to, unnamed sources, we don't do that. We need to have somebody named and backing up there and someone we can verify with a military or intelligence record making those claims. So to answer your question, it's very, very difficult. We have a lot of stories in mind that we'd love to print, but we don't have the backup to do it. We're waiting for that. We're trying all the time. And a lot of people are very nervous. There have been both Lou Elizondo and David Grush have talked about actual death threats that they have gotten for coming out and reporting certain things. So it's not something to be taken lightly. The people who come forward do it at great risk to themselves. First of all, some of them are covered by security clearances still to this date. Lou Elizondo cannot say all the things he knows, nor can David Grush. So they have to be very careful what they say. And it's very, very hard. It's a very, very difficult area of reporting. And as I say, if your standards are high like ours, that you won't report anonymous statements, it makes it particularly difficult.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's several questions involving kind of the international landscape here. Let me see if I can sort of combine what I'm seeing here. People are quite interested in what else is out there in the rest of the world and how this is being viewed. Russia and China have come up, but for instance, I know that Chile is kind of a hot spot for UAP discussion and citing. So would love to hear you kind of talk about the international landscape, but there's also some questions about the competition with technology. So I wonder if you're reporting, and I understand that you're trying to make sure things are backed up with sources, but perhaps you could broadly comment on, whether you've seen U.S. officials concerned about, say, the Russians or the Chinese being ahead of us when it comes to reverse engineering or competition. So once again, it's kind of internationally, broadly kind of talking about that, and then sort of the military reverse engineering competition.
Right. Okay. So first of all, people often say, well, why is this only in America? What's happening in the rest of the world? And I came across this in my John Mack reporting, and John Mack went all over the world collecting stories from people in many, many different countries who reported encounters with alien beings, and not only and way beyond sightings of UFOs. This is international. It's all over the world, every country. It's not always reported to the same extent in every country. We have a very active media in America, but certainly these cases span the globe. And as a matter of fact, other countries in South America and France, particularly, have been more active and more open about their UFO agencies, government agencies, discussing these encounters.
Like the French, right? They've done a lot.
The French have been way ahead. The Brazilians, the Chileans, a lot of South America has been more open. They don't have quite the same stigma as we have. For, I don't know, very complicated reasons, but they don't. So they have government agencies that deal with these sightings and accounts. And the media has been very active in these countries too, reporting it. But it's a worldwide phenomenon. And to the second part of your question, yeah, the United States, is by all the accounts, we are very concerned about what the Soviets are doing and what the Chinese may be doing. That's what David Grush certainly reported. It's a worldwide arms race to get this technology, because as I said, the country that would master this technology would immediately be the world leader in so many ways: energy, power, military. So the stakes couldn't be higher. These sightings have been worldwide. The crashes and retrievals have reportedly been worldwide, not only in the United States. So every country, every advanced country is looking for the same things, the breakthrough. So it's definitely an arms race.
Yeah. Okay, just a couple more questions as we get towards the finish line here. Here's a really important one. To what degree do you think people who are reporting these UAPs are actually observing something that is beyond humanity? Or is it the testing of new technologies being developed by our military or government? What do you think about that?
Everything we've been able to determine is that these are not Earth-based technologies. They have capabilities that seem to go way beyond, especially the stories about objects going into and emerging from the water and traveling underwater at unthinkable speeds, like the speed of sound. Given the resistance of water, it's unthinkable that there's anything of earthly technology that can do that, and that can plunge from the atmosphere into the water and come out again. So the idea that this is new technology, that's experimental technology, is being tested. Yes, there's a lot of testing of experimental technology at Area 51, the famous Area 51 that the U.S. has in the desert. Yes, we're testing a lot of advanced technology, none of which I'm privy to, and no other reporter is privy to. But that doesn't account for the very astounding reports of the capabilities of these objects. And people like Dave Fravor, one of the pilots we talked about, who said he observed this tic tac, he eyeballed it. It was close enough to see this was not anything that was an advanced earthly technology, because no country has anything remotely capable of doing the things he observed. And this is not me saying it. This is a highly decorated pilot who has experience in this field. So the answer to your question, it's not earthly technology. There is certainly experimentation going on, but not that would explain the most sensational of the reports.
Got it. Well, one final question here, and I think it's a good one that, based on all of these things, do you think that there's kind of a critical mass being reached here? Are these incidents becoming more frequent, or are we just seeing the stigma fading a little bit, people reporting it more, or do you believe that there's more going on?
That's a very good question. Whether there are more of these incidents happening or whether they're just being reported better is almost unknowable. But I do think we've made a lot of progress in terms of people officially looking into the matter. As I said, Congress is now concerned. The government has said things it's never said before, such as that these things are real, and encouraging members of the service to come forward and report. So there's definitely been progress. Whether there's more of these things now than there were before, or whether it's coming in waves. There was a big wave of reports in the 50s, which started this whole UFO, furor. So it did seem to be a concentration of reports back then, and again, fairly recently. But is it because our technology is better? We never had the ability to take videos like the ones we put out in the New York Times years ago. Those are very high-tech videos that wouldn't have been possible a few years ago. So now we have that. It's much harder to deny that these things really exist. So that's where we are. But whether we're moving towards some definitive point of disclosure where someone, they're going to land on the White House lawn, as they say, and announce themselves, I don't know if we're close to that.
Yeah, this has been an absolutely fascinating discussion, Ralph. Before we finish things off, we have a lot of our clients on here, and this topic might have seemed like an unlikely one, but I think it speaks to kind of how we approach things at Interfor International, because creativity and kind of looking around corners and trying to think about risk from a broad perspective is really important to what we do as professionals when it comes to uncovering intelligence and keeping people safe. So I think this conversation is very much in line with those goals that we try to do for our clients. And I personally have enjoyed it very much and really appreciate you. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Don Aviv once again.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Ralph. Wow, this was extremely informative. I started off by saying that I thought this was a bit of a departure from our normal topics, and in the intelligence and security consulting world. Excuse me, but I disagree. I think after listening to you two talk, I now feel that it is very much appropriate and applicative to the types of cases and matters we handle. And really, there's a call towards preparedness that I think that we all have to focus on as a general society. So thank you very much for your time. It was quite informative. For our clients and friends out there, if you have any follow-up questions or you want to talk about this or speak to Jeremy and or Ralph more directly, please reach out and we'll make that happen. Again, our next session is going to be more in line with kind of the private equity and hedge fund world discussions and topics, and that's going to be coming up in the next few months. So we'll reach out and let everyone know about that in due course. Until then, stay safe and thank you very much for your time.